Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your boy, it's your host, Maurice Ager, aka Mo Ager, man. And we all the way live, man. This is NBA Shit with Mo Ager, man. We got you guys covered. We will be covering the Los first round. Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your boy, it's your host, Maurice Ager, aka Mo Ager, man. And we all the way live, man. This is NBA Shit with Mo Ager, man. We got you guys covered. We will be covering the Los Angeles Lakers and the Golden State Warriors. And we're going down, man. And me, myself, first round draft pick, Dallas Mavericks. 5 years professionally, basketball. Yeah, and I've done it from Maine to Spain, baby. And we're here to discuss some cool topics. And I got my co-host, D-Rex, baby. DJ D-Rex, MC D-Rex, whatever he call himself. And that's what it is. We out here. Let's go.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, share. Welcome to the NBA show with Mo.
Absolutely. Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your boy, it's your host, Maurice Ager, aka
The Portland Trail Blazers don't have the assets to trade for another superstar, and creating the cap space needed to sign a top-tier free agent outright, like rumored target Zach LaVine, for instance, would force general manager Joe Cronin to decimate the roster's existing core. Under immense pressure to justify Damian Lillard's recommitment to Rip City and immediately level back up in the Western Conference, though, they can't react to that dispiriting reality by focusing firmly on the horizon. Rebuilding on the fly around any 32-year-old max player, let alone a point guard, isn't supposed to be easy. Missing out on an extra lottery pick then falling to 7th in the draft virtually assured Portland would have to sacrifice the future for the present this summer. Adding OG Anunoby wouldn't vault the Blazers toward the top of the West in 2022-23 or even guarantee they'd be back in the postseason after the league's longest active playoff streak came to a close in April. He's probably too mechanical a scorer and playmaker to ever be more than a great team's fourth offensive option. Anunoby is one of the best one-on-one defenders in the league, truly capable of checking all 5 positions, but isn't especially disruptive away from the ball. A two-way star isn't coming to Portland, though, and Anunoby checks as many boxes on the wing as any top-tier role player. Making him an even more attractive target for the Blazers? Anunoby is still just 24, fitting timelines of both Lillard's remaining prime and the Blazers' life without him. Anunoby, basically, would be as close to an ideal addition for Portland as seems possible after Lillard's utterly disappointing night at the draft lottery. According to Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report, the Blazers have been linked as a potential destination for Anunoby in the offseason. What's still unclear isn't just whether he has any desire to continue his career elsewhere, but also Masai Ujiri and the Toronto Raptors' interest in moving Anunoby regardless. Two sources with knowledge of the dynamic told BR that Anunoby has not directly expressed discontent with his situation with the Raptors. Perhaps the conversation around him has been driven more by external interest in acquiring the fifth-year forward services. 2 landing spots already linked by league personnel have been Utah and Portland. Anunoby and Jeremy Grant, rumored to Portland since before the February trade deadline, have become the Blazers' primary targets, per Bleacher Report. Both players would provide sorely needed length, athleticism and scheme versatility for Chauncey Billups' team, also fitting snugly into the $20.9 million trade exception Portland netted in the CJ McCollum trade. But the obvious on-court reasons Anunoby would make such an impact for the Blazers are the same ones Toronto and the league at large hold him and players of his archetype in such high regard. Just like the Detroit Pistons with regard to Grant, the Raptors' asking price for Anunoby could be too steep for Portland to meet, according to Bleacher Report. However, league personnel believe Toronto would require far more than Hart in the 7th pick to part with Anunoby, considered to be a darling of Raptors lead executive Masai Ujiri. Anunoby's trade value is seen as greater than Detroit's known asking price for Grant, 2 first-round picks or a first and a promising rookie-scale prospect. Grant isn't at Anunoby's level as a defender and reportedly wants to remain a borderline primary offensive option if Detroit trades him. Anunoby also has 2 years remaining on a bargain contract, while Grant will soon become eligible for a 4-year, $112 million extension. Intel suggests he's intent on signing. Per game numbers and overall reputation be damned, there's a case to be made Anunoby should be ahead of Grant on Portland's offseason wish list. Does that mean Cronin and his revamped front office should be comfortable pushing all of their chips in for a player who definitely won't put the Blazers over the top? A trade framework of the 7th overall pick, the Milwaukee Bucks 2025 first-rounder and Toronto's choice of Keon Johnson, Greg Brown III and Trendon Watford for Anunoby could at least raise Ujiri's eyebrows. Filling that prospect placeholder with Josh Hart or Nasser Little instead might even be enough to get Anunoby to Portland, but again leave Billup's roster absent the quality wing depth necessary to punch above its weight in the playoffs. The Portland Trail Blazers don't have the assets to trade for another superstar, and creating the cap space needed to sign a top-tier free agent outright, like rumored target Zach LaVine, for instance, would force general manager Joe Cronin to decimate the roster's existing core. Under immense pressure to justify Damian Lillard's recommitment to Rip City and immediately level back up in the Western Conference, though, they can't react to that dispiriting reality by focusing firmly on the horizon. Rebuilding on the fly around any 32-year-old max player, let alone a point guard, isn't supposed to be easy. Missing out on an extra lottery pick then falling to 7th in the draft virtually assured Portland would have to sacrifice the future for the present this summer. Adding OG Anunoby wouldn't vault the Blazers toward the top of the West in 2022-23 or even guarantee they'd be back in the postseason after the league's longest active playoff streak came to a close in April. He's probably too mechanical a scorer and playmaker to ever be more than a great team's 4th offensive option. Anunoby is one of the best one-on-one defenders in the league, truly capable of checking all 5 positions, but isn't especially disruptive away from the ball. A two-way star isn't coming to Portland, though, and Anunoby checks as many boxes on the wing as any top-tier role player. Making him an even more attractive target for the Blazers? Anunoby is still just 24, fitting timelines of both Lillard's remaining prime and the Blazers' life without him. Anunoby, basically, would be as close to an ideal addition for Portland as seems possible after Lillard's utterly disappointing night at the draft lottery. According to Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report, the Blazers have been linked as a potential destination for Anunoby in the offseason. What's still unclear isn't just whether he has any desire to continue his career elsewhere, but also Masai Ujiri and the Toronto Raptors' interest in moving Anunoby regardless. 2 sources with knowledge of the dynamic told BR that Anunoby has not directly expressed discontent with his situation with the Raptors. Perhaps the conversation around him has been driven more by external interest in acquiring the 5th-year forward services. 2 landing spots already linked by league personnel have been Utah and Portland. Anunoby and Jeremy Grant, rumored to Portland since before the February trade deadline, have become the Blazers' primary targets, per Bleacher Report. Both players would provide sorely needed length, athleticism and scheme versatility for Chauncey Billup's team, also fitting snugly into the $20.9 million trade exception Portland netted in the CJ McCollum trade. But the obvious on-court reasons Anunoby would make such an impact for the Blazers are the same ones Toronto and the league at large hold him and players of his archetype in such high regard. Just like the Detroit Pistons with regard to Grant, the Raptors' asking price for Anunoby could be too steep for Portland to meet, according to Bleacher Report. However, league personnel believe Toronto would require far more than Hart in the 7th pick to part with Anunoby, considered to be a darling of Raptors lead executive Masai Ujiri. Anunoby's trade value is seen as greater than Detroit's known asking price for Grant, 2 first-round picks or a first and a promising rookie-scale prospect. Grant isn't at Anunoby's level as a defender and reportedly wants to remain a borderline primary offensive option if Detroit trades him. Anunoby also has 2 years remaining on a bargain contract, while Grant will soon become eligible for a 4-year, $112 million extension. Intel suggests he's intent on signing. Per game numbers and overall reputation be damned, there's a case to be made Anunoby should be ahead of Grant on Portland's offseason wish list. Does that mean Cronin and his revamped front office should be comfortable pushing all of their chips in for a player who definitely won't put the Blazers over the top? A trade framework of the 7th overall pick, the Milwaukee Bucks 2025 first-rounder and Toronto's choice of Keon Johnson, Greg Brown III and Trendon Watford for Anunoby could at least raise Ujiri's eyebrows. Filling that prospect placeholder with Josh Hart or Nasser Little instead might even be enough to get Anunoby to Portland, but again leave Billup's roster absent the quality wing depth necessary to punch above its weight in the playoffs.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me.
Duncan Robinson has been a feel-good story around the NBA since coming into the league. After starting his college ball at the Division III level, Robinson transferred to Michigan for his final 3 seasons. He was only the second men's basketball player in history to transfer from a DII program to a D1 program and receive a full scholarship. The sharpshooter established himself as a legitimate long-range threat and opened the door for an NBA opportunity. The 6 feet 8 inches forward went undrafted in 2018 but was given a chance on the Heat's Summer League team. Robinson proved himself and eventually ended up carving out a role for himself on the full-time roster. It seemed the Heat had found a diamond in the rough and a part of their long-term rotational plan. Miami even gave Robinson a 5-year deal worth up to $90 million this past offseason. Despite the hefty contract and impressive shooting, Duncan Robinson has fallen out of good graces with Eric Spoelstra. After averaging 25.9 minutes per game in the regular season, Robinson's minutes were cut to just 12.2 per game in the playoffs. He also was held out of 4 postseason games entirely. With his subpar defense likely the reason for the minutes decline, it may be time for the Heat to consider a trade. Here are 3 potential trades as the Heat search to take the final steps to a championship-caliber team. There has been growing speculation that OG Anunoby could be on the move this offseason. The Raptors' forward is a terrific two-way player who has grown each season in the NBA. The 24-year-old is coming off a career season in which he averaged 17.1 points, 5.5 rebounds, 2.6 assists, and 1.5 steals. He would fit into Heat culture perfectly and his defensive ability would assure he can play postseason minutes. As great as the Raptors are with their quality wings, they could use a guy cut from a different mold. Duncan Robinson would add an interesting element with his elite off-ball movement and quality shooting. Toronto has some interesting questions to answer regarding the future of the team, but Duncan Robinson would be an interesting splash in a different direction. The Atlanta Hawks certainly seem set for some changes this offseason. The gravity and playmaking that Trae Young commands opens up everything and the Hawks need shooters around him to capitalize. Duncan Robinson is about as elite as they come as a shooter, averaging a career 40.6% shooter from beyond the arc on 7.9 attempts per game. The Michigan product's movement off-ball would make things much easier for Trae Young. This move would also need to be paired with an elite perimeter defender, which should already be on the Hawks' list of priorities. DeLon Wright is continually underrated in the NBA. The journeyman plays hard-nosed defense and is versatile in who he can defend. Wright proved his value in the postseason with Atlanta and could be a key to allowing Tyler Herro more time on the court. His defensive impact would help cover for Herro and possibly open the starting job he seemingly covets. Onyeka Okongwu would also be a terrific backup for Bam Adebayo. While Dwayne Dedmon has been solid, he is on the downhill portion of his career. Okongwu plays a similar style to Bam and would be a near-perfect plug-and-play replacement. The thought process in building around Luka Doncic should be similar to Trae Young. Both players are impressive passers who demand a ridiculous amount of attention. Duncan Robinson would be able to capitalize on the open looks that Luka creates and serve as an offensive upgrade for the team. The Mavericks have done a nice job surrounding Doncic with shooters already, but the desire to improve should never stop. The Heat would walk away with a nice collection of role players in this trade. Maxi Kleber is a capable floor spacer but holds similar defensive concerns. His size should lead to more time on the court regardless. Frank Ntilikina struggles offensively but carries the defensive impact Miami craves. Even with the deficiencies on offense, he proved valuable to the Mavs in their conference finals run. Josh Green would also be a nice building piece for the future. The 21-year-old was regarded fairly highly coming out of college but has failed to crack the rotation on a regular basis. Giving him a change of scenery could be beneficial for the shooting guard. If he
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that, spitting slow, spitting fast, I could roast, I could...
Let's establish one thing before we go any further. The proposals in this article do not constitute predictions. It is highly unlikely that Damian Lillard will be a Los Angeles Laker next NBA season. For starters, his Portland Trail Blazers look unlikely to move him. Most observers expect them to trade the 7th pick in the upcoming draft for a win-now veteran to provide Dame with support. Furthermore, the Lakers aren't in a great place to broker a deal for Lillard. They're low on assets in terms of both tradable contracts and draft capital. In all likelihood, the marriage between Lillard and the Lakers isn't meant to be. Nonetheless, unlikely is not impossible. With some creativity, the Lakers could make it happen. This is the NBA, as a rule, crazier things have always happened. Without further comment, here are 2 crazy trades that send Damian Lillard to the Los Angeles Lakers. We told you these deals would be, for lack of a better word, creative. This one is downright bonkers. It's the type of blockbuster that would have NBA Twitter rioting for a week. What makes it even remotely feasible? Well, the Charlotte Hornets need a big man desperately. Anthony Davis, when healthy, is one of the league's best. Obviously, that's a big caveat, but if he does get his body right, the Hornets are unlikely to regret packaging so many assets to acquire the 29-year-old. Meanwhile, the Portland Trail Blazers land 2 young players with major upside in Jones and Bachnight in addition to 2 first-round picks and a pick swap. That's a good package for a team that will be inevitably rebuilding following the departure of Lillard. On the other hand, this deal is imperfect. The Hornets are giving up a lot to land an injury-prone Davis. The Trail Blazers might prefer a more proven NBA commodity in return for Lillard. Finally, the Los Angeles Lakers have said that Anthony Davis is untouchable, whether they're to be trusted or not. If any of those teams are unwilling to take on this large of a gamble, there might be another 3-team deal that leaves them both satisfied. Here, the Los Angeles Lakers and Portland Trail Blazers arrange a sign-and trade with the Phoenix Suns that ought to leave each side more satisfied. Granted, an expiring contract and 2 first-round picks, one of which is protected, may seem like a light return on Phoenix's end. After all, Ayton is a recent number 1 overall pick. Unfortunately, he's also a distressed asset. The Suns seem to feel that a traditional big man isn't worth a max contract. Of course, that begs the question, why did they choose one with the first pick in the NBA draft? If the Trail Blazers think they can answer that, they'll have to entertain this offer. They'd have to feel there were levels in Ayton's game to be unlocked. If they see more than a rim runner/rim protector, they could be landing their new franchise player with this deal. Meanwhile, the Lakers land their 3rd star. If they can find any way to turn Russell
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed 'em. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to believing. Got a taste for blood and my tongue keeps bleeding from the words I spit. So sharp, so freezing, so cold. Behold, frostbite they feeling. I could tear you apart or I could go heal 'em. Don't believe in fate, don't believe in ceilings. I just need a taste and my mind starts feeling. I don't pace myself, I grind on kneeling. Got lust for change.
In the case of the Brooklyn Nets, it appears that the bridge is falling. Is this the point where they destroy and rebuild it this NBA offseason? 80s rap references aside, this team may be in trouble. Rumors suggest that the team may be apprehensive about offering Kyrie Irving a long-term contract. Given his recent non-committal approach to basketball, that's understandable enough. The problem is, it could cost them Kevin Durant as well. The same rumor mill suggests that Durant may request a trade if the team doesn't retain Irving this summer. Suddenly, what was supposed to be a dynasty may end before the team even reaches the conference finals. In the midst of all that chaos, there is Ben Simmons. Like Irving, he's been frequently unavailable, although his absences are at least partly accounted for by physical injury. The Nets don't know how he fits within their offense. As a non-shooting ball handler, it's not exactly an easy question to answer. Maybe the Brooklyn Nets don't feel like trying. Moving Simmons for some value could lead to a successful 2022-23 season. That could mend all the seemingly frayed relationships within this group. If the organization feels the same way, here are 3 new trade ideas that find Simmons a new home. Somehow, it feels like this Minnesota Timberwolves trade must have already happened on some parallel timeline in the multiverse. The Timberwolves were heavily linked to Ben Simmons leading up to this year's trade deadline, but as we know, they struck out. Now, rumors suggest that they'd like to move on from D'Angelo Russell, so it's not hard to make the connection here. Meanwhile, this Timberwolves trade finds Russell reuniting with a franchise that gave him his best years. When Russell was suiting up in Brooklyn Nets black and white, he looked the part of a future superstar. The Nets would be hoping he can recapture some of that magic after making this trade. Furthermore, they'll be happy to add Patrick Beverley into the fold from the Timberwolves as well. The veteran point guard brings leadership, toughness, and above all, defensive intensity to any squad he joins. On the other hand, the Wolves may not miss him after acquiring Simmons. After all, he's one of the best defensive players in the National Basketball Association when healthy. Recently, rumors are suggesting that OG Anunoby is growing unhappy with the Toronto Raptors. Allegedly, he felt that with the emergence of rookie sensation Scottie Barnes, he lost too many ball handling reps. Could he find a more suitable home in Brooklyn? Of course, Kyrie Irving will remain the primary ball handler. Anunoby could be next in line. While many of Brooklyn's sets will remain focused on getting Durant an opportunity to score, Anunoby could regularly play the role of initiator. Meanwhile, Gary Trent Jr. is no throw-in here. He's one of the best 3-and-D guards in the NBA. If anything, this may be too high of a price for the Raptors to pay for Simmons' services. After all, they already have 2 jumbo playmaking wings in Barnes and Pascal Siakam. At the same time, that's part of what makes this deal intriguing for the Raptors. By tripling down on that archetype, they may be able to simply overwhelm opponents with length in transition. The Raptors could get really freaky and designate Simmons as their full-time starting center. If they want to really push their experimental brand of basketball to its limit, they'd have to entertain this offer. There's an irony in this Indiana Pacers deal. Miles Turner, realistically, is exactly the player the Brooklyn Nets would like to acquire to complement Ben Simmons. After all, few quality rim protectors in the NBA also happen to own a career 34.9% three-point percentage. Turner is the rare 3-and-D big man as he's shown to be with the Pacers. He'd be perfect alongside the non-shooting Simmons. In the same breath, Turner is perfect anywhere. His plug-and-play ability is one of his biggest selling points. By acquiring him and the sweet shooting healed, the Nets would have assembled their most complete team of the Durant/Irving era. Meanwhile, the Indiana Pacers signify that when team president Kevin Pritchard said this team wouldn't rebuild, he wasn't joking. The acquisition of Simmons would have to be viewed as a win-now move. If he can get healthy and regain his prior form, who knows? Both teams.
The Los Angeles Lakers are not going to trade LeBron James this NBA season. Before we proceed, we'd like to acknowledge that reality. Nobody has ever traded LeBron James, and in all likelihood, nobody ever will. Consider this a thought experiment. With that said, it's one worth entertaining. The Los Angeles Lakers are in a tight spot. Russell Westbrook's trade value appears to be less than zero. If Anthony Davis continues shooting 16.9% from three-point range, his may plummet as well. Trading LeBron James may be the best way for this team to actually retain some value for their aging, overpaid, misshapen roster. Again, it's not going to happen. The Lakers will exhaust every possibility before turning to this one. In that extremely unlikely event, here are 3 trade ideas involving LeBron James. By all accounts, DeAndre Ayton looks due to depart from the Phoenix Suns. He's said to feel underappreciated. Having logged just 17 minutes in a deciding Game 7 against the Dallas Mavericks, it's hard to blame him. Could he be the next great Los Angeles Lakers big man? Again, probably not. All of these scenarios are unlikely. Regardless, they're justifiable. The Lakers are swapping a 37-year-old former number 1 pick for a 23-year-old one. There's an obvious advantage in that. Of course, the former is a candidate for best player of all time, while the latter is the subject of debate about extending max contracts to centers. Nonetheless, if the Lakers were intent on trading James, he may welcome this trade. Retiring in sunny Phoenix alongside his close friend Chris Paul on the Suns sounds like a pretty good way to close out his career. Who knows, it might land him another NBA championship as well. Something about the mental image of LeBron James in a Golden State Warriors evokes feelings. Either it doesn't feel right, or it feels so wrong that it does. It wasn't long ago that James battling with the Warriors in the NBA Finals was a perennial occurrence. This deal finds the King joining him, even though he was able to beat him, once out of 4 times. The on-court product would be sensational. Recall how poorly James fit alongside Russell Westbrook in 2021-22. Now picture the exact opposite. Trying to contain James's drives to the hole with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson spacing the floor ought to be a literal impossibility. On the Los Angeles Lakers end, they're landing a quality young 3-and-D wing in Wiggins and a potential superstar in Kuminga. We can't stress this enough. This will not happen this summer. The point is that it can be justified. Golden State Warriors fans won't likely complain about this proposition. In 5 years, it may be Lakers fans who'd be celebrating it. Since we're already living in a fantasy with this piece, we couldn't resist going a little further. LeBron James's third return to the Cleveland Cavaliers would make for must-watch TV. The thing is, it would also make for quality basketball. In teaming with Evan Mobley and Darius Garland, he'd make his team instant title contenders. Assuming, of course, that the Cavaliers kept them. Who knows if James may enter LEGM mode. Either way, there's plenty to work with here to assemble a powerhouse team. The Cleveland Cavaliers would be giving away control of their draft for years to come, but they're landing LeBron James. They'll live with it. In all likelihood, they wouldn't be retaining Sexton anyway. They wouldn't hesitate on this deal. The Los Angeles Lakers would. That's why this won't get done.
Sometimes I feel like all is lost, but I know it's not true. I wanna put up all my walls cause I'm not in the mood, but then I cut myself off from the rest of the room. I know that time can heal it all if you're patient, and soon it can all be worth it. All the searching, pain is never really permanent, but damn it hurts, man. I could feel all of the turbulence and it's concerning. I've been searching for a purpose, I hope it's worth it. This society is really trying me, ain't no hide and seek.
For weeks, speculation has swirled online and on social media about Kevin Durant potentially being traded to the Phoenix Suns. There are now odds that seem to support that speculation. Bovada released odds for where the NBA star will play next season, and the Phoenix Suns are very high on the list. They are only behind the Brooklyn Nets, Durant's current team. It lists the Nets at -5,000 to be Durant's team in 2022, making Brooklyn a huge favorite. But the Suns are next in the odds at +1,500. The Dallas Mavericks +1,600, Boston Celtics +1,800, Golden State Warriors +1,800, Toronto Raptors +1,800, and Memphis Grizzlies +2,000 are also included in odds for the NBA Stars' next team. Durant has spoken fondly of Devin Booker and the Suns in the past, which has added to speculation that he might want to play in Phoenix should he be traded from the Nets. "It's a pretty game for one," Durant said of Booker on a podcast in April. "I just think he's really mastering who he is right now. He's figuring it out, like how to play at an elite level and still win. He's always scoring the ball, but he knows how to win." Durant and Booker were teammates on Team USA in the Olympics last year, and Durant praised Booker then. "It just shows you how all-around D-Book is," Durant told reporters after a game. "Lot of people look at him because he's such a pretty scorer, he can do things so effortless. But he is a savant. He wants to be an all-around basketball player." Durant also has connections to Suns coach Monty Williams from their time together with the Oklahoma City Thunder. "He's a leader and a teacher," Durant told reporters when the Suns hired Williams. "I'm excited he's back into coaching and walking those sidelines again." He added, "I got to know the type of man he was," Durant said. "His coaching style is what it is because of the stuff he's been through as a person and how he looks at life in general." Durant wasn't done. In that interview, he said he knew that Williams could succeed in Phoenix. "He knows how to talk to people, for one. He knows how to communicate and he's honest," Durant said. "That's lacking in our world in general. It's just truth. Especially when you're talking to him on the basketball court, you have a group of guys that will get better. He has a young core that is hungry to get better and is hungry to have some success." Sportsnot.com's Vincent Frank looked at some scenarios for the Suns and other teams to possibly land Durant in a trade, if the star were to try to force his way out of Brooklyn. While he didn't rule it out, he did say it would be difficult to see it happen. In addition to this huge contract and salaries having to come close to matching, Brooklyn simply isn't giving Durant away for nothing, Frank wrote. Looking at a potential deal to the Suns, Chris Paul would have to head to Brooklyn to make the salaries work. From there, the Nets would likely demand Mikal Bridges and draft picks to make this worth their while. Heavy.com also didn't seem to think the Nets would part ways with Durant. Frederick Ennett wrote, "The bottom line is that it is hard to imagine the Nets investing nearly $200 million in extending Durant, just to part ways with him a year later. The Nets have been unpredictable, but it would be hard to see them trading a top 3 player in the NBA." Fansided broke down a proposed trade for Durant to Phoenix that had the Suns giving up DeAndre Ayton, Cameron Johnson, Torrey Craig, Landry Shamet and some first-round NBA draft picks. Colin Helwig wrote of the deal, "This deal makes no sense for the Nets, as they could get far more for Durant from teams in more stable situations than Phoenix. After all,
As the Golden State Warriors prepare for the NBA Finals, they probably aren't thinking about potential blockbuster trades this summer. That's not going to stop us from doing the same. Sometimes, the rich get richer. Even if the Warriors do win the NBA championship this season, that doesn't prohibit them from upgrading their roster this summer. In fact, that may be the smartest decision they could make. After all, much of the rest of the league is likely to do the same. The Dallas Mavericks will likely pursue a co-star for Luka Doncic. The Milwaukee Bucks will have Chris Middleton back. Teams like the Lakers, Pelicans, and Trail Blazers figure to be more competitive. Even back-to-back trips to the finals are far from guaranteed. Acquiring a star player like Julius Randle could make them more likely. Here are two big trade ideas that have the Golden State Warriors doing exactly that. In a vacuum, a straight Randle for Wiggins swap is probably not ideal for the Golden State Warriors. Andrew Wiggins has established himself as a quality 3 and D wing with secondary shot creation skills. Randle is a more dynamic offensive player, but on his own, he's probably not worth the trade-off. The addition of Alec Burks might pique the Warriors' interest. He replicates a portion of Wiggins' output while allowing them to also add a high-end playmaking forward in Randle. Meanwhile, this deal is interesting from the Knicks' perspective. They're parting with 2 first-round picks in their effort to cut ties with Randle. Things do not appear to be working out between him and the organization, but would they give up so much to get off his contract? Well, that's not all they're accomplishing here. They're landing Wiggins and a very intriguing prospect in Jonathan Isaac. He's been injured for much of his brief NBA career to date, but when healthy, he's flashed the potential to be one of the best defensive players in the league. He's still not worth 2 first-round picks to the Magic. They're likely to bring on one of Chet Holmgren, Jabari Smith Jr., or Paolo Banchero in the upcoming draft. That renders Isaac expendable. This trade is a no-brainer for them. This summer blockbuster would only be possible via sign-and trade. Zach LaVine is hitting unrestricted free agency. He'd have to sign off on a trade to the Big Apple to make this work. If the spotlight appeals to LaVine, that won't be an issue. His gravity-defying brand of basketball feels like a perfect fit for the sport's biggest stage. Meanwhile, the Chicago Bulls get a solid return for him and Caruso here. Acquiring Wiggins could allow them to stay competitive in 2022-23. On the other hand, if they're forced to rebuild following LaVine's departure, the New York Knicks' 2023 first-rounder is a valuable asset. They could move Wiggins later, along with DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic, and find themselves in good shape for the future. Finally, the Golden State Warriors land Randle and Caruso. We've already covered the former, while the latter is one of the best point-of-attack defenders in the NBA. Granted, he'll crowd the Warriors' already impressive backcourt rotation. That's fine. The Warriors will run 3-guard lineups that teams will struggle to stop. All of which currently exists in the realm of fantasy. The Warriors are more likely to make small alterations to their roster this summer if they make any. On the other hand,
Let's go. Yo, I'm like an addict, do I gotta have it. I ain't even playing, got a really bad habit. If it moves, gotta grab it, fuse like a magnet. Lose, won't have it till I'm doomed in a casket. I ain't playing, got a weird mind. If you work 8 hours, I'ma work 9. If the shoot tastes sour, you should taste mine. I'ma stay in power for a long time. Get up, nah, I ain't a quitter. Toss me the ball, I'm a really big hitter. Big picture, I'm a straight killer. Rising the song to the highest bit.
The Los Angeles Lakers' first order of business this NBA offseason has been completed, as they found their next head coach. Darvin Ham, formerly an assistant coach of the Milwaukee Bucks, will be leading the team next season, taking over the job from Frank Vogel. Ham will likely have a much different roster to coach than the one that Vogel did at the end of the 2021-22 season. Los Angeles missed the playoffs, not even qualifying for the NBA play-in tournament, which should lead to some major changes this offseason. There is only so much the Lakers front office can do, as this is a franchise void of many tradable assets and draft capital.